Welcome to Aliyah Yomi, the Aliyah of the day, where we go through the Torah portion word by word. This is the second Aliyah from Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, in our Language of the Prophets series. I'm Rabbi Yirmeyah Benavrom, and I will be your guide. Today we go through Bereshit 23, verse 17, through chapter 24, verse 9. And it starts out with verse 17, Yod Zayin, V'yakam sedei Ephron asher b'machpelah asher lifnei Mamre. And we'll stop there at the Afnachta. Okay, so Yakam, this is from Kum. You see the Vav here. So the root is Kuf, Vav, Mem. Oftentimes with these hollow verbs, they're called, that have a Vav in the middle of them, the Vav will disappear in other forms because it was originally a very light consonant, even when it functioned as a consonant, like a W sound, wo, even though we don't pronounce the Vav that way today, nor do we call it Waw, unless we're pronouncing Shwa, this particular sign here. The scholarship calls it Shwa in most scholarly articles, although those who studied modern Hebrew may be accustomed to calling it Sheva, right, because the W became a V sound. So, and arose, right? And rose up is what it means. So what's the subject? It looks a little bit confusing. So you get Sedei, which is a field, and Ephron, and really it turns out that this is a construct state here, a construct chain. And so what we have, I'm trying to change the color here, it doesn't want to agree, it doesn't want to let me, okay fine, we'll just stay the same color. What we have is, these two words are functioning as a single unit, right? And the munach is actually hinting about that. So munach ravihi, right here. So this means the field of Ephron, and you have to say the again because in a construct chain, the definiteness of the last word determines the definiteness of the entire phrase. All right. So since Ephron is a proper noun, it's a name. That means we must say the field of Ephron, and any other thing that was part of the chain would be the to make sense in English. If you wanted to say a field of Ephron, you have to use a lamed instead. You cannot use a construct to suggest that. In later biblical Hebrew, in the Nach, sometimes you have the word shel used, and this is actually what survived in a modern Hebrew, right, which people are more accustomed to using. Asher, so the field of Ephraim, which is ba Machpelah, which is in Machpelah, which is interesting. It suggests that the name of the cave was actually the name of the entire region, right? So they called the region the Machpelah, right? You can see there's still the Ha is here. It survived with its footprint underneath the bait, right? So there's Asher Lifnei Mamre, which is before Mamre, right, in that area. And this is interesting. It's kind of suggesting that the field went from a lower status. According to Rashi, it went from the status of a commoner, i.e. Ephron, the one who sold it to Avraham Avinu, up to the status of a king, being owned by a king. And that's why the text says it arose up. So it's something there. That's Rashi's opinion on that. Ibn Ezra says that we can interpret this to mean that it transferred possession to Avraham. That is, the transaction actually occurred. So whichever way you want to look at it, it's still kind of a neat thing. Okay. It's done. Hasadeh v'hama'ara asher bo. So the field and the cave, this is the word for cave, which are bo, in it, right? Your pronominal suffix o at the end there. V'chol ha'etz asher basadeh asher b'chol gevulo saviv. And every tree, all the tree, literally all the tree, right? You have to say trees in English to make it sound good. And all the trees, which, with our relative pronoun, and oftentimes, as I've mentioned before, in Tanachit, we leave out the word to be. It was, it will be, and at the most you'll see it once. You don't usually need to have it more than once in the sentence. But the time is already established up here by the Vav conversive and the imperfect. So this is a past tense narrative already. We already know that in this verse. So there's no need to say is or was in Hebrew anymore. So here, in your translation to English, we need to add was. So, and every tree which was in the field. So again, you've got the footprint here, from the definite article. You see that strong dagesh in the scene. So that shows there was a ha there. And the inseparable preposition beit moved into place. So ba sadeh. If it was in a field, it would be be sadeh, but it's ba sadeh. In the field, asher, which was, again in English, was bechol gevulo, in all of its gevul, is a boundary, all of its boundary, saviv, surrounding around. Verse yod chet. So of course this is 18. L'Avraham, l'mikna, l'einei, v'nei chet. So belonging to Avraham, right? It's literally to Avraham. To Avraham, to the for a so miknas, like possession. It's something like that. It can express, sometimes it can express like livestock. The idea is it's something that you have acquired, something you have kanad, right? So with Hebrew morphology isn't always predictable, but we have a mem here at the beginning. Oftentimes when you have a mem in front of a verbal form, it's something that has to do with that verb, right? It's either the agent of or the thing being acted on. So what you kane, what you acquire? Well, you acquire possession. So we were just talking about the subject, which is the sadeh Ephron, and it continues to this next verse. The sadeh Ephron was to Avraham, belonging to Avraham. This lamed here is showing possession. Again, in Torah, we don't use shel. Right? Well, if you've studied modern Hebrew, you're not going to see shel. Instead, we use lamed. And then this lamed is not showing possession. This is not genitive. This is dative. For a possession, not dative. Sorry, it's just two or four, like that inseparable preposition. Le to the eyes of the Bnei Chet. So the idea is in the sight of the Bnei Chet. They understand that he owns it. They witness the transaction. The Chol ba'ei sha'ar iro. Among everyone who came to the gate of its city. Okay, and remember the gates of the city were where the business transactions occurred. Like I mentioned, Lot was at the gate of the city, sitting at the gate of the city, probably as a judge, as the Midrash tells us, or perhaps in the recent Torah portion, or perhaps he was just doing some kind of business transaction or something like that there. Okay, continue on to verse Yod Tet, so that's 10 plus 9. V'chareichen kavah. So, and after such a thing, after the occurrence, kavar Avraham buried. Here's the definite direct object marker. What did he bury? Sarah ishto. Sarah, his lady. Me'arat sedei hamachpelah al pnei mamre hi Hebron. It's interesting. It says he buried her towards the cave of the Sadeh of the Machpelah, right? By the face of Mamre. Okay, and so this language, the Machpelah, shouldn't throw you off. We do this in English too, like the Ukraine, the Philippines, right? We call entire regions sometimes by the. Now, this is something interesting here. We have he. You'll notice, oops, sorry, my touchpad, my laptop does that sometimes. You'll notice that the consonants are actually the consonants of who, right? So this is, which would mean he. So this is he in English. So this is another example of Ketiv Kare, right? It's written as who, but the Masoretes correct it to be he, that we should pronounce it as he, right? Spelling was a little bit different from age to age. So it should be feminine because it's a city, right? Referring back to Il, we saw previously. It is Hebron. So this is so that later readers of the Torah would understand where the region is that we're talking about. The Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. Even Ezra comments that this verse 19, that this whole thing happens in order to teach us of the level of the land of Israel, meaning the spiritual level, as home, both for the Chayim and the Mate, for the living and the dead. And it is on track to confirm that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's promise to Abraham of the Eretz Canaan should be an everlasting possession, that it's forever. So there's none of this need to be fair and transfer it to some other people just because they might seem to be impoverished or luckless or unhappy or throwing stones or whatever. It's the eternal land of Abraham's descendants, not the Jordanians, not the Egyptians, even if they call themselves by a new name, Palestinians. Verse Kaf, 20. Vayakam hasadeh v'hame'ara asher bo Avraham nachuzat kavel. Okay, that's our end of the clause. So this vav I'm going to translate more like so. You shouldn't be stuck on always saying and or but for vav. It's kind of like maybe an intermediate mistake to always make it be the conjunction. Really, it's much more flexible than this in the Tanakh. The vav can mean and, it can mean but, it can mean or, it can mean when or because. Like there can be a conditional attached when using conjunction with im. It can even be emphatic, the vav emphaticum, which means like an exclamation point. So if you're trying to hammer your verse out and bring it into your language and it's not working so well, try using one of those other ones and see if it connects it a bit better. It's actually closer to the Greek day, the Greek, if you've studied Greek, the delta epsilon, as a connecting particle, really, than it is just and or but in English. Okay. So the field and the cave, which were in it, transferred, like they rose up, they went up to Avraham, for a achuzah. An achuzah, the absolute form is with a hey, is a possession. Usually this is used in reference to land, right? Like a holding, something like a holding, a big value. So as a holding, and then it's in the tav, it goes back to its ancient form because this is a construct chain again, right? So we have a construct chain there. I like to use blue for that. Because one of my students, she diagrams them as blue and for the construct chains, and why not have a specific color? So that one would be blue. We'd have maybe blue over here. Yeah, okay, great. Okay. As a possession, as a holding of kaver. So this is like a burial plot, something like that, right? Like a place to bury the dead. And you might be wondering, why is it kaver, not kever? This is a little bit of an advanced topic. What's happening is the word is in pause. And so, just as every Hebrew word has a syllable that is accented, so here we have, if you look, we have accent, right? So that means it gets more stress. It's not vayakam, it's vayakam. It's not hasadeh, it's hasadeh, right? It's not vehama'ara or vehama'ara, it's vehama'ara. See, there's a little accent mark, okay? So just as each syllable has a stronger pronunciation to it from the rest, so too, there was a word in the clause that gets a stronger pronunciation. And that originally, in ancient times, in this case, would have been kever. And because kever got the stronger accent, it became kaver. The short vowel, if you know your vowel lists, this can be helpful. If this bothers you, if not, it's fine. Just learn inductively. Don't worry about the minutia for now. You'll eventually just notice these things, and it will feel natural. But if you want to know, sagol is what we call a short vowel, okay? And kamet says a long vowel. And so what happens is the short sagol that was under the kof, or kuf, depending how you pronounce that in your tradition, lengthens to kamet. Whenever a word goes into pause, there will be a lengthening unless the vowel is already a full vowel. Like over here, the suluk also causes a lengthening, but tsere is already a full vowel, so there's no need to lengthen that beyond. Okay? So, me'et b'nei chet. Me'et b'nei chet. From, with, the children of chet, is what that literally says. And sometimes you may hear me, when there's a tav without a dagesh, and it's a name, I'll actually, at least in my written translations, I'll translate it th. Some of you might wonder why we have Bethlehem, right? Well, that's why, because it was Beit Lechem. But in ancient times, the tav without a dagesh was pronounced th. So Beit Lechem is actually the correct name of the city. If we want to update it to modern Hebrew pronunciation, then yeah, it changes. But if you're curious in the authenticity, the authentic pronunciation, then it's Beit Lechem, like that. So this would have been the B'nai Cheth. All right, now we are into chapter Kaf Dalet. So Kaf Dalet, of course, is 24. And let's get into it. The Avraham Zaken Ba Bayamim. Now, that's another way you can translate. Well, I would say now. Now Avraham Zaken Ba came into old age. Bayamim, in the days, right? So obviously there's some kind of idiomatic stuff happening here. Vadonai berach et Avraham bakol. And Hashem had blessed Avraham. So we have the definite direct object marker, so we don't need to translate that. If you've forgotten the rule, this occurs when the object of the verb is definite, right? So when we know who or what we're talking about, right? Bob hit a ball. Ball is not definite, so you wouldn't say et a ball, right? You wouldn't say et ball. But if it was the ball, then it's definite. You get et in there, right? Or if the ball had a name like Mr. Frank, right? Then you hit Mr. Frank, then it's et. It's definite. Or if it's his ball, ownership also makes something definite. We know the domain of the object, so then you get an et there. In Aramaic, it's yat, by the way, so it's not just Hebrew that has a definite direct object marker. Bakol, in everything. He blessed him in everything. And it's interesting, Rashi actually has a comment about this, Bakol, and he says that the gematria of Bakol is in all things is actually the same as in Bain, as in a son. So if you add up these numbers, presumably so, 2 and 20 and 30, right? So yeah, let's look, let's do it. Okay, so 2 for the bait, well, that's kind of hard to see, but okay, and 20 for the kaf, that's what these letters represent in Hebrew numbers, and 30 for the lamed. Let's test Rashi out, okay? What do we get? We get 52. 52, okay? I'm going to switch to yellow. This red is not so visible. Okay, and now the word for Bain, that's not supposed to be a kaf. That's me trying to draw on the touch tracker of a laptop. Bain. So bait is 2, and noon is 50. So yes, indeed, 50 plus 2 does equal 52. Next time we'll do some integrals instead. All right, continuing on. Verse Beit 2. Vayomer Avraham el avdo zekan beito hamoshel b'chol asher lo. Then Abraham said to his Eved, right? So, that's your pronominal suffix. You should know these. Learn these if you don't, meaning his. And Eved becomes Avid, when you put a suffix on the end, because this is the construct form. It's a little bit weird. I'm going to explain it. If you don't want to know it, that's fine. But for those of you who are grammar nuts, like language geeks like myself, or you just like to know everything about Lashon HaKodesh, here's why. Eved is what's known as a segelet. So segelets are words which have 2 segols. Not strictly speaking, that's part of the. They have 2 segolet in a row. Okay. Oh man, sorry, it's drawing on the thing is not okay. So what's segol? Segol is the letter with looks like a diamond, right? It's the 3 points, right? 2 of those in a row, like melech, right? Melech, king, is a segelet. Okay, all right. And so if I wanted to say his king, the pattern that the segelet follows is the same as Eved follows here. So I would let's put my consonants down. Mem, patach, shwa. Sorry, this lamed looks different from that one. They are the same. And then the kaf is no longer Sophie. and then the pronominal suffix o at the end, right? So mal, and that's mal ko, right? His king. See? So same thing with Eved. Avdo. You also have some words that both have pataks underneath them, also behave like segel. It's like na'ar, right? Like a lad. Okay. Zaken Beito, who was old in his house, who was old in his house, meaning the oldest one of his household. He's trusted, right? An older servant, or Rashbam phrases he's advanced in his years, right? The idea is that you can trust him sexually with this task, right? Not to mess it up, right? He's not going to take the girl for himself or something like that. He's a trusted servant. Ha-moshel. So mashal means to rule. Mashal plus bait, right? That's usually the construct we use for to rule. This is an active participle, so a moshel is one who rules, right? And when you put a hey in front of an active participle and it's referring to a person, then it means who. That's the same thing as saying asher. Again, for those of you who study modern Hebrew, this would oftentimes just be she. It would be the prefix she. Right? It also comes in later Tanakh in Rabbinical Hebrew. So ha-moshel is the one who ruled bechol asher lo, over everything which was his. And here's what he says: Simna yadcha tachat yerechi. So Abraham says, place now your yad, right? Pronominal suffix cha, your yad, your hand, tachat, underneath yerechi, my thigh. E is the suffix, my yerech. Verse Gimel. And even Ezra comments on this, that in the Miqraot G'dilot, that the reason for having the servant put the hand under the thigh, that if they were men of equal standing, they would shake hands, or they would do the covenant thing, right, with killing the animals and cutting them to pieces, and they'd walk through the middle, right? These are for equals, right? Or at least when someone's being humble and saying, you're like my equal. But for a father to a son, it's similar for a master to his servant, especially a servant who's been in his house for a long time. And if you remember, this is really appropriate with this servant, because Avram at one point in time was going to allow him to inherit everything when he thought he wouldn't have a son, right? So definitely he's like a son to him. So he does this action of submission, and I can't remember, one of the other sages say that Avram would have been sitting down with his feet up, like in like a kingly position, and the hand would just be under the thigh like that, right? Showing that I am under your authority. Maybe the leg might even be on the person's shoulder or something like this. Gimel, verse 3. Ve'ashbi'acha b'Adonai Elohei hashamayim ve'Elohei ha'aretz. And swear an oath. You shall swear an oath to Adonai, in Adonai, the God of the heavens and the God of the earth. And there's our etmachta. So we'll stop there. Okay, so he's definitely going through some kind of ritual sort of thing to impress upon the servant just how important it is to make sure to fulfill what's happening here, right? So it's actually, pardon me, the ashbiacha, there's a yod here. I mistranslated that, and I just noticed that. This tells us it's in the hefil, the causative form, right? So if it's the sheva, shin, beit, ayin, this means to swear an oath. But, sorry, the hefil is a causative of that. So it means, I will cause cha, you, to swear an oath by Adonai, the God of the heavens. Okay? Got it? That's a bit better there now. Anochi, pardon me, here. Velohei ha'artz, the God of the land, or the earth in context. Asher lo tikach isha livnei mibnot haknaani asher anochi yoshev bekirbo. That you shall not take. So this is lakach, becomes tikach. Lamed likes to disappear in lakach, and there he is in the kuf telling us, hey, I used to be here. I caused the kuf to double instead. You see that? So you have to be like a language detective when you're reading in the Tanakh, right? You're putting the pieces together. If you feel overwhelmed, don't worry. Pray. Hashem will help you. The Ruach HaKodesh will definitely help you if you commit your time and your resources to studying. And even if it seems taxing wherever you are in your biblical Hebrew studies, after a while it gets easier, the dam breaks, and you'll just enjoy it. And in my own life, I can say that there have been times in my life when things weren't going my way, and I really just, I should have felt really down and depressed, but just knowing biblical Hebrew was something that would come to my mind, and it'd be like, oh, I'm so grateful I have that. Nobody can take that away from me, right? And so to be able to have that connection, that spiritual connection, and it is something, Rabotai, you can build up. Just keep going. As long as you keep moving forward, it's going to happen, and you will be blessed. It's granted, it's not easy like languages like Spanish or French or something, but because we're dealing with the classical language here, right? So it changes over time and stuff. There's different vocabularies, but you do have the extra gift of the Ruach. I'm not sure that the Ruach is always going to help people to learn, German or one of these other vulgar modern languages. Okay, so let's continue. Do not, so that you will not take an isha, a woman, livni, from my son, mibanot, from the daughters of Hakenaani, the Canaanites. Okay, so notice I said the daughters, right? So you should be recognizing this, even if you're just learning, inductively, what's happening here. This is a construct phrase, right? So since the last word is Kenaani, that's a proper noun. So it's not any old people, it's the Canaanites, right? So that makes the whole phrase the. So from the daughters of the Canaanites. Okay, yeah, well, that's just horrible. But anyway, imagine that said the. Asher Anochi, and here this is a bit trickier. So technically what's happening with syntax, asher means which or who. So with whom, right? It's being used instrumentally because it's coming before the verb. This is how Tanakh likes to say with a lot of times. Even though there's not a bait here. We would expect it to say something like with whom with a bait, right? But Asher just doesn't have to do that, right? So there you go. So with whom, Anochi, I, Yoshev, live, Bekirbo, in their midst. I'm dwelling in their midst. It's interesting, though, that it says in its midst. Right? Isn't that interesting? Okay, verse Dalet. Ki el artzi ve'el moladti telech. Instead, ki's being used as the opposite of a connection. It's giving you. Ki can be used. Man, why can't I select that? I'm trying to erase what I just drew. This laptop is quite aged and it's showing its age. I apologize for that. Okay. So ki can be used to express an opposite idea, right? Like instead, right? So instead or but unto artsi. So this is my land, right? And if you recall, just like I look at the top of the page, just like I showed with segelet nouns, eretz is a segelet noun. So just like melech became malki, just like eved became avdo, or melech becomes malko, these would have been malki is king, like malki tzedek, right? Or avdi is my servant. So here we have artsi. Eretz becomes artsi, my land. Okay, so those vowel changes should start to be familiar to you. Ve'el and unto moladti. Moladti is like my motherland, right? The place where I was yuledet, where I was born. The root is yod lamed dalet. A yod at the beginning of a root oftentimes becomes what used to be a waw, right? That's what this is here. That's what that's happening. In case you're like, what is that word? Vav lamed dalet. It's not. It's yod lamed dalet. Yalad, to give birth. Telech, you shall go. So this is from halach. Although Ibn Ezra would probably disagree and say it's from yalach. Okay, fine, maybe. Either way, they mean the same thing. The hay falls away, and again, Ibn Ezra says this never happens, that initial hay falls away from a verb. So maybe I'm wrong. They're the same thing. Yalach and halach. If there is a yalach, it means the same thing. So, telech, you shall go. Velakachta isha lifnei Yitzchak, and you shall take a woman for my son, for Yitzchak. It's interesting. He makes sure he understands. Not for Ishmael, for Yitzchak, right? Because he could have just stopped, livni, for my son. But he clarifies, for Yitzchak. It's like he's trying to make sure the servant knows very specifically. By the way, not just either of my sons, right? I want you to take him for Yitzchak. And you might wonder, if this is so important, why didn't Abraham go himself? Why didn't he go out on this journey? I mean, it could be maybe he was still sad about Sarah, right? Or maybe it's still too raw, too fresh to put his mind on business like this. Really, Abarbanel comes with an answer for us here, and he says it's because Abraham was too busy and too tired to take such a trip, right? So maybe he's too tired because of his grieving, right, and his mourning, and busy because he's still tending to being a host and helping people. All right. Remember, we only have 7 days that we sit Shiva, and after that we're supposed to get out of the grief, right? Start living again. Verse Hey. Vayomer elav ha'eved ulai lo tovei ha'isha lalechet acharei el ha'aretz hazot. Okay. And he said unto him, right? So there's the him, the suffix, right? Who? The servant. He said to him, the servant. Okay, so the servant's doing the one talking, sorry. And the servant, here's the subject. The servant said, Eliv to him, right? Vayomer Elav ha'eved is the subject. And the servant said to him, Ulai lo tovei ha'isha lalechet acharei. Maybe the woman won't be willing. Ava means to be willing, right? To be willing. And interestingly enough, I've noticed that in the Torah, this word seems to always be used in a negative sense. You are unwilling, you were unwilling, right? And we even see this with Yeshua HaMashiach. I can't remember what the Greek word was at the time, but if you trace back the Greek verb that is used in the apostolic writings, when he says you were unwilling, and you go and you look through the Septuagint, it's this word. Lo tovei, you were unwilling. Lo toveu, lo avadtem, you were unwilling. Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you to myself, right? Like a bird gathers her goslings, right? But you were unwilling. And so, strangely enough, this oftentimes, it seems, or maybe always, is used to express a negative willingness, right? It doesn't say ratzon, right? Or ratzah, which is to be willing or to desire, right? That's used more positively. This verb seems to be the one that's used for not being willing. So what if the woman is unwilling, lalechet, this is the infinitive, to go, acharei, after me, el ha'aretz hazot, to this land, which is perfectly reasonable. He's not the groom himself. What if he's some strange guy who's just making up stories and he's going to sell her into, prostitution or something, right? So there's a lot of reasons she might be unwilling. Hehashev ashiv et bimcha el ha'aretz asher yatzata misham. So this is the hey interrogative here, the hey and hehashiv. You might be wondering, why is it hey and not ha? It's kind of complicated. In short, the hey interrogative is pointed oftentimes. It changes pointing in a similar way to how we see the definite article and the word ma changing how they're pointed, right? So it's coming before another hey here, so that's why it's he, okay? So hey specifically a hey with a comments under it. So shall I, that's like in Espanol, the upside down question mark, right? So shall I hashev, this is a he fill form. It's from shuv, right? Like shuvami, right? Sheen, vav, beit, shuv, like to make teshuvah, right? But this is the he fill form. That's what the hey says. So it's a causative form. Shall I make return? In other words, shall I bring back ashiv, your son? So here we have he fill again. Okay, I'm sorry. It looked like he fill form to me. It is he fill, but it's the he fill infinitive absolute. This first one. Hashev here is the he fill infinitive absolute. And the second one, we see the yod before the third letter, telling us this he fill form. This is ashiv, means I will bring back. I will cause to shuv, right? So when you see the infinitive absolute before the verb, it means definitely. Will I definitely bring back et bincha, your son? As I mentioned last time in yesterday's Aliyah, if you were to swap the order of these words, if instead it said ashiv, hashev, then it means continuously. Will I continuously bring back your son? Like, all the time, we're going back to the land you came from all the time. But it doesn't say that. Fortunately, he's not crazy. He says, shall I definitely bring back, shall I indeed bring back your son, El Ha'aretz, to the land, Asher, which, Yatzata, you went out from, Misham, from there? Verse Vav. Oh, and actually, there's something I want to comment on here on verse 5. She might instead insist that Yitzhak comes and brings her back, right? And so he might not want to follow her because of her own self-respect, Abarbanel comments in Miqraot G'dilot. So again, we know she's tzedeket, whoever's going to marry Yitzhak, so it makes sense, all these questions. A smart servant working out the protocol ahead of time. A bad servant is one that you have to or worker, you have to constantly tell the same thing to. They forget your instructions. They can't think on their own, right? Instead, we see that this one he's really on top of things. Verse Vav. Vayomer elav Avraham. Then Avraham said to him, Hishamer lecha pentashiv et beni shama. Okay, it's kind of hard because there's alternate pointings here to me off. You have this tradition and this tradition. Right, we have two different ones. So, guard yourself, protect yourself, right? Like, do not let this happen. See, it says Hishamer, so this is the an imperative from the Nifal, right? So keep guarded, right? Lecha for yourself, that you do not pen tashiv, return at bini, my son, shama, towards there, even towards there, not just there, but direction towards there. Don't even start going back that way with him, is what the text is being very specific about. And Ibn Ezra comments, he loves to talk grammar sometimes, that this is very interesting. The reason that the accent is here under the sheen, see the munach under there, he says that whenever it is on the penultimate syllable, so this would be the ultimate, the last syllable, and this would be the penultimate, right? So the one before the last, then the meaning is be careful not to, right? So be careful not to. It implies a negative. It's not hishamer, la'asot et yom HaShabbat, guard yourself to do the Sabbath day. It wouldn't be with this accent. It would be hishamer, right? But this is hishamer. It's very interesting. Hishamer lecha. So that's an interesting observation from Ibn Ezra. And our last slide for the second Aliyah, we are in verse Zion, which is verse 7. Adonai Elohei Hashemayim Asher lekachani. Pardon me, lekachani. Okay, my throat's, maybe I won't sing it. I'll just translate my throat's. We had a typhoon recently, and I'm kind of fighting off a cold. So, Adonai, the God of heavens, who took me, lakachni, he took me, mi beit avi, from the house of my father, mi eretz molati, and from my motherland, or the land of my kinsmen, vasher diber li, and who said to me, vasher nishpa li, and who swore to me, lemor, saying, L'zaracha etain et ha'aretz hazot, to your offspring, literally to your seed, I will give this land. Hu yishlach malacho lefanecha velakachta isha lifni misham. So Avram's expressing faith at this point, right? Good faith. He's saying, this one who did all these things, who, he, yishlach. The who is superfluous. You do not need this word who, right? Yishlach means he will send. Malacho, his angel, right? He will send, right? It could also mean he is sending, right? He is sending, and he will be sending. The who means there's extra emphasis. Avram's saying who's going to do it, right? He, or you could say he himself, to bring some of that into English. He himself, not an archangel, not a Ben Elohim, not one of the sons of God, the higher level beings, right? But actually, Hashem himself, Yishlach Melach, will send his angel lefanecha, before you. Velakachta isha, and you will take a woman, leave me for my son, Misham, from there. And this is really nice. This is actually, it's not a prayer, right? It's an expression of faith, right? Or you could, because Kuni actually considers it prophecy, right? He's saying this, he's so certain of it, with the hu yishlach melacho, the language that it convinces Chizkuni that it's actually prophetic, what Avraham Avinu is saying. For sure, we can interpret that way because it happens, right? Okay, so verse 8, V'im lo tovei ha'isha lalechet acharecha v'nikita mishivuati zot. But if the woman is not willing, lo tovei, lalechet, to go acharecha, after you, so he's still covering his bases, so the servant's not worried, v'nikita, then you will be innocent. Mishivuati, from my shavua, from my oath. Zot, this one, okay, this oath. I'm not sure why it's not hazot, right? Because Shavuoti makes it already definite, so I would have expected it to be hazot. So for those of you who like to really dig, there might be something to that. There might be something mystical to why grammatically it's not hazot when we would expect that. Because adjectives agree with the nouns, especially. So typically of noun followed by adjective, and they agree in gender, in number, and in definiteness. So shavua is feminine, zot is feminine. Shavua is singular, zot is singular. Otherwise it would be ele, right? Shavuati is definite, so we would expect hazot to be definite, but it's not. So it's kind of interesting. Technically, you could even interpret this grammatically. Then you will be innocent from this, that is my oath, right? So maybe something like that might be more in order. But I think there's something mystical happening here. So any of you with a proclivity to dig into those things, maybe if you find something, let me know. Rak et beni, only. My son, lo tashiv shama, do not bring him back towards there, right? Not just there, don't bring him back there, but don't bring him back towards it in that direction even. And we have something that's happening here. There is extra emphasis. Abraham's doing something. So you see the et beni here, et beni. This usually would come after the tashiv, after the verb, right? That's the usual order. Verb, subject, an indirect object can shove its way in, sometimes right after the verb, and then direct object. When the direct object comes before the verb, this is either poetic or it shows special emphasis, right? So Abraham is choosing his words very carefully with whatever the expression of putting zot here is, and then et bani, it's kind of like saying this is emphasized, like saying rak, only my son, lo tashiv shama, do not bring him back there. You see? The Choshul comments in the Miqraot G'dilot that Abraham is saying, in this case, you are to allow Yitzchak to get married to whomever he can find for himself, right? So you just let him do as he will, right? It's no longer your responsibility. And I'm making you swear this, that you will go over to that place, but do your best, right? It's still b'choshoy. So just do your best. That's all I expect from you. Because he knows he's a good servant and he really wants to serve his master. Okay, that's the end of our second Aliyah. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment field below. I will do my best to get back to them, whenever I can. And as always, be strong and be strengthened and be edified. You can do it. Step by step, day by day. Just be in the Tanakh. Remember, studying biblical Hebrew counts as part of your Bible study time.